Hello, I'd like to welcome you all for financing or funding your adoption. I am Laura Beauvais-Godwin with Nightlight Christian Adoption. And also with me is John Hine of the Hine Law Firm and Dwain Guillion with the Abba Fund. And tonight we're going to go ahead and be discussing on funding your adoption. We're going to talk about why adoptions cost so much and what other adoptions don't cost as much, ways that you could reduce the expenses associated with your adoption, as well as ways that you can actually raise funds. And tonight we're going to be specifically addressing for a while the specific elements of the new adoption tax credit / refund. I do want to mention that although we have some knowledge about certainly raising money, adoption, and the fact that a tax credit is now available that's even more generous than ever, and John Hine of the Hine Law Firm, who also specializes in tax and estate planning, is with us to discuss some of this, that each situation is unique to you, and we are not accountants, and we cannot address your, of course, specific situation, and we are not giving specific legal or accounting advice, but just letting you know that what is available. And also, even as we were discussing before we started, that some of this information needs to be discussed with a professional, because sometimes the interpretation can be different for each family. So how much does an adoption actually cost? Well, as I mentioned before, some adoptions don't cost anything, and those are the adoptions through social services. These are children who are in the foster care system. In general, if you adopt through the social service system, not only will your adoption cost you nothing, also you may receive monthly subsidies. In addition, there's a way of adopting domestically, and generally adoptions of primarily of a newborn domestically, usually the expenses and the fees will come to about $20,000 to $30,000. International adoptions get to be probably the most expensive because there is so much traveling involved and other paperwork requirements and dealing with immigration and so forth. So those adoptions usually cost between $25,000 and $45,000. And then there's also embryo adoption, and depending upon how quickly a woman were to become pregnant, the cost of the adoption can be anywhere from about $12,000 to $21,000. And so why are adoptions so expensive? Well, in domestic adoptions, for example, you have a lot of attention that has to be given to the care of the birth mother. There's also the legal fees, background reports, court fees, travel that families are required to have, and a lot of the care goes into taking the work goes into taking care of the birth mother and sometimes the birth family. And then once the child is born, there are relinquishments, filing paperwork with the courts, advertising for a birth father, and then sending paperwork through interstate compact. International, there's expenses related to immigration, obtaining visas. Travel can certainly double sometimes the cost of an adoption alone. Say, for example, adoptions to Russia, Moscow is one of the most expensive cities in which to stay. And then if you're traveling within the country itself, that could be very expensive. In addition, most adoptions do require some type of humanitarian aid to be given as well. And then the expenses in an embryo adoption is the home study and post-placement, the agency fees and services for matching and the transfer of the embryos. And sometimes the family needs to have this procedure done a number of times before a successful pregnancy is achieved, and sometimes expenses can be added on to that for medical reasons as well. And then with social services, why are there no costs? Basically because our government pays for it through federal and state dollars. I had attempted to find out how much it actually costs for an adoption, and no one can give me an accurate answer, even up to the federal level, on how much adoptions are costing. But we do know that they probably do cost at least $20,000 per child. That is not including the subsidies that families do receive. And certainly the reason that also that certain foundations, such as the Kellogg Foundation, also donate money for adoptions through the state. And I think for families who are adopting, and I know this is for my husband and me, when we went to look to adopt after experiencing infertility, sometimes it could feel very unfair. Everyone else gets to have a baby, and they don't have to, insurance pays for having a baby, and you really don't have very many expenses in the birth of a child because it is covered by a third-party provider insurance, health insurance. Whereas when you do adopt, you actually do have to spend money in order to adopt a child. And you can maybe feel like, well, this is just not fair. Also, families also feel like, I'm really doing a great thing. I want to go overseas. I want to rescue an orphan. Why does it cost so much? And that can make you feel that this, again, is very unfair, particularly to the children. But we have to remember that if God is calling you to adopt, you need to go ahead and trust Him to provide for your adoption, and that God does love to provide. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. We've never seen really money come between a person who really is genuinely called to adopt and an actual adoption. So one thing to also do is that we know that it's expensive, but there are ways that certainly you can reduce the cost of adopting. One way is through social services. As I said before, those adoptions are free. I mean, they're free to the parents. Of course, they're not free to the taxpayer. And unfortunately, for children who go through the system, it's really very much of a burden. But nonetheless, for families who are adopting, that obstacle has been removed. When you go to adopt, agency fees and expenses can vary quite a bit. And so that's something that you want to do is do a comparison of what each agency or attorney is charging. And sometimes you can also reduce the other expenses associated, such as using frequent flyer miles, getting someone to donate them to you, using less expensive hotels, and then perhaps working only with birth mothers in your state of residence, or situations where a birth mother may be due at the very, maybe due relatively soon, versus, say, starting to work with a birth mother who's 3 months pregnant, and there are a lot of expenses. And have part of the fee be tax deductible. For example, with Nightlight, with our birth mother expenses, we cap that. In addition to that, what is charged for helping the birth mom is actually a tax deductible donation. And as I mentioned before, adopting through social services, there's no fees, there's subsidies. In addition, there's tax credit, which we are going to go ahead and talk about. And when you're adopting through social services, even though you're not paying any money, you are eligible for the tax credit, which makes it an incredibly attractive situation for those who really feel like you cannot go ahead and adopt. In addition, a lot of times when children are adopted and they have special needs and they have emotional issues and so forth, having the post-placement support is really important, and that's something that oftentimes good social services will provide for you. Sometimes you can reduce your expenses also by adopting a domestic child with special needs. It still can cost several $1,000s, but it may not cost between $20,000 and $30,000. Sometimes if you do think that you want to adopt a domestic newborn child who may have special needs, be sure that you are home study ready, because when these situations do arise, instantly a family is needed. And also a great website to go to is CHASK, and it's Christian Homes for Special Kids, Christian Homes Adopting Special Kids. And if you go to that website, you can learn about children who are available for adoption, and often the fees and expenses are very much reduced. When you want to adopt internationally a child with special needs, you may again think, well, this definitely they'll reduce their expenses. But a lot of times, the children with special needs and the care for them and what goes into the situation is actually more expensive. So oftentimes, the fees and the expenses cannot be reduced. Certainly travel cannot be reduced, the expenses associated with that. Sometimes some agencies will go ahead and offer scholarship programs, or through donations they can go ahead and reduce the fees. Reducing some of the financial risks of a domestic adoption, and I think this is something that happens that really does increase, obviously, people's expenses, is when they enter into an adoption and it doesn't go well. According to Adoptive Families magazine, 38% of adoptive families had said that a situation didn't work out. but they did say that the attempt cost them less than $5,000. And when you are working with a birth mom, living expenses in general cannot be refunded to you because a birth mother can't pay those back to you, and that it is out of a pocket expense. We at Nightlight have tried to ease that burden by making it a donation and then not having families pay again if an adoption fails. And again, as I mentioned before, selecting a birth mother who's later in her pregnancy can also help you reduce some of those expenses for her living expenses. Also, some of the attorney fees or an agency services, those fees may not be refundable. So check with an agency or an attorney to find that out. And tax credit can be applied, which we're going to again talk about, can be applied to a failed adoption the year after you go ahead that an adoption is failed. And so this can really help reduce the expenses associated with it, because that if the adoption is failed, you have to wait to get that money back, but all is not lost, and especially for families who feel like this is my only opportunity to adopt, and if I lose money, I'm not going to be able to enter into another adoption. And then reducing the risk in an international adoption, sometimes this is a little less certain. And what I tell families is to make sure that a country has a very stable program. For example, China is a very, very stable program. But even that, things can change. I mean, certainly China more recently has been changing some policies. And some of the other things that you can be more aware of is agencies that are asking for large sums of payment up front. Sometimes agencies that particularly show children, they photo list them, and certainly photo listing is a great way to find a child. It's a great way for a child to become adopted, but sometimes some agencies have used this as a ploy to bring families in and then require a lot of money to be paid up front because someone falls in love with the child's face. And then the other issue that's a little bit more difficult to address in this kind of format, but certainly we at Nightlight really, really encourage families to be very well prepared, very well educated, because once a child is in your home, that the kind of problems or issues that you may be facing obviously can be very expensive. The child needs therapy, psychological therapy. If the child's going to require you to take a lot of time off from work, it's just going to require a whole change of lifestyle. Needless to say, that can be very emotionally and financially draining on a family. So really knowing what you and your family can really handle and what kind of support systems, family support, church support, et cetera, that you do have in place. And we're not just talking, again, about physical needs of a child with special needs, because sometimes those can just be through surgery, say a child with cleft palate, and through some dental work and so forth, once the child can go ahead and be surgically corrected. But we're talking about lifetime and long-term issues that a child may face that can change your family. And then, of course, related to a physical special needs, you want to make sure that you do have good insurance coverage as well. All right, what are some of the resources for the funds? And this is where we get to the tax credit. John, you want to go ahead and talk about the tax credit?
Sure, thanks, Laura.
Okay.
Can you hear me all right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Just want to introduce myself. I'm John Hine. I'm a tax attorney in Greenville, South Carolina. And just to add a little bit to what Laura said at the beginning, I'm going to give my own legal disclaimer. This in no way creates a attorney-client relationship with anybody that's listening, and this is for informational purposes only, is not legal advice. And I do, again, encourage you to contact your local professional, either tax attorney or CPA, if you have a specific question that would be specifically related to your situation. But this is just kind of an overview of the new things that have happened. So as a result of the Health Care Act, the tax credit available to couples who have adopted has been raised to $13,170. And it's better than a tax deduction because a tax credit actually reduces the amount of tax you owe instead of reducing the amount of income you have, which is then taxed. So anytime you can get a credit versus a deduction, you're going to be better off with the credit for tax purposes. Also, there's a slight change from the numbers that are on the slide here. There is a phase out of this credit if you earn $182,520. Then at that point you start getting phased out, and you're completely phased out if your income is $222,520 or more for the year of 2010. And all these changes are only start in 2010. So if you had an adoption in 2009 that became final, then unfortunately you don't get the benefit of this amendment. It only becomes effective post December 31st, 2009. So January 1st, 2010 until December 31st, 2011 is when this is in place. And those numbers are adjusted for inflation. So next year they'll be a little different. So if you have a case that becomes final in 2011, you're going to want to check to see what the numbers are for 2011. Also, one resource I would like to point everybody to is the IRS website. Has all their forms and instructions, and one great form you can look at is Form 8839, which is the actual attachment you would put with your Form 1040 for claiming the credit. And even better than the form is the instructions to the form. They do a good job of laying out the rules. Now, obviously, the numbers are going to be different for 2010 because they haven't issued a new form or instructions yet, but they give you the basic rules of what it was for 2009, and only a few things have changed. But the biggest thing that has changed is the tax credit is now refundable, and it's just like the earned income credit. If anybody's familiar with the earned income credit, it's a refundable credit to you. That means if you have a tax liability of $5,000 and you had expenses of $20,000 for your adoption, then you get the full $13,000. I moved my paper. The full $13,170. So you would get the $5,000 credit towards your tax liability, and then the remainder of that money, the $8,170, would come to you as a refund. So instead of spreading it out over 5 years like the previous law did, you'll get that full refund for that tax year. And another important thing to note is that when you adopt, that it's a per-child adoption credit. So the form and instructions ask you how many eligible children you have. So if you had 2 eligible children, then your possible credit would be $26,340. However, like the slide says, adoptions do not usually double fees or expenses. But you're probably, like Laura pointed out before, if the adoption in itself or one adoption costs $20,000 to $30,000, you don't need to double your fees to take full advantage of the $26,000
right,
credit.
And especially if you're adopting, say, like a sibling group, for example, from Russia. You know, Russia gets to be very expensive, again, because of the travel, but your travel expenses are not double. Once you're on an airplane, you're on an airplane.
Right.
And once you're in a hotel, you're in a hotel. And so if you're adopting 2 or 3 children, you could see where people or families who are adopting, say, 3 children, and it's coming close to $40,000 with the tax credit and refund, that you could really have almost your whole adoption paid for with this. And certainly $26,340 makes a great dent into an adoption. And again, you're not going to sign up for the twins, say, with an attorney or an adoption agency with domestic adoption. But again, if you're adopting 2 children, sometimes there's a little bit more fee associated with twins. But in general, there's not, because it's not double the work. So you can see where you can recoup more money in this situation.
Right, and I don't know that I don't think the slides touch on this, but if you have an employer that has an employer program which reimburses you for some expenses, you still can take a credit for the remaining expenses that you have. Now, you can't take the credit and the reimbursement for the same expenses, but if you were reimbursed, let's say, $5,000 from your employer, and you had another $10,000 in expenses, then you can get a credit of $10,000, and then when you add that with your $5,000 reimbursement, then that covers all your expenses. But you can't double up on the what the employer reimbursed you for, and you can't try to then claim the credit for that amount because your employer has already reimbursed.
And John, we are going to talk about the employer benefit and how that works out. Maybe we could readdress it because it does get a little confusing.
Right,
definitely. Go up to there.
And Laura, you want me to talk about the failed adoptions at this time?
Yeah, sure. Let me go ahead into that.
Okay. If a birth mother changes her mind and the adoption fails, you can still take the credit. However, if, let's say, you tried to adopt in 2010 and it failed in 2010, you cannot take the credit until you file your return for 2011. So that would be when you file your return in the beginning of 2012. So you have to wait a little bit to get the credit, but that's if the adoption fails, you have a one-year postponement basically, but you still get the credit for the failed adoption. And again, it would be the max of the $13,170 or your expenses. So say your expenses were $8,000, you can't take the full credit. You're capped at that $8,000. But
it's still, it's nice to know that money can come back to you.
Right, and
and then we were talking about this before we got on. Well, not this specifically, but about us when you adopt through the state too, that you can actually get that money in return. And we're actually talking about other credits that families are eligible for, but maybe just to address that about when you do adopt through foster care or
right.
through the state system, that you actually are eligible to receive that money as well.
Right. One thing to remember is I just said that if you don't have expenses, then you don't get the credit. The big caveat to that is if you adopt a child with special needs, and a child with special needs is defined in the tax code, and it says the child has special needs if a state has determined that the child cannot or should not be returned to the home of his parents. Such state has determined that there exists with respect to the child a specific factor or condition because of which it is reasonable to conclude that such child cannot be placed with adoptive parents without providing adoption assistance, and the child is a U.S. citizen. So if you adopt through DSS, there's probably a good chance, and again, it would depend on your specific situation, but there's probably a decent chance that the child has special needs. And a lot of people probably don't, if they don't spend anything on the adoption, they might think, I didn't spend anything, so why would I get a credit? And maybe if you were like me before you read this, you thought special needs meant a physical or mental handicap. Well, that's not the case. It doesn't necessarily. Those are special needs, but those aren't the only ones. So, it includes things like ethnic background, age, membership in a minority or sibling group, or the presence of mental condition or physical, mental, or emotional handicaps. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you adopt through DSS. Just because you don't have expenses does not mean you can't get the credit. It just means you might have to look a little harder to see if you qualify. So that's one thing to remember when you adopt through DSS.
And let me just also add to that. This is even for those who are not adopting through DSS here in South Carolina. But if you're a South Carolina resident and you're adopting domestically, so you could be adopting a healthy infant, but if the child is at risk for special needs, and it's very broadly defined at risk, For example, if you don't have a birth father history, or if the birth mother, say, smoked, used drugs, used alcohol during the pregnancy, that puts the child at risk for special needs. And therefore, the child you can receive $1,500 in what's called non-recurring subsidies. And most families do receive this. Now, some families, they have a full birth father, full birth mother history. Everyone's healthy. The child is not at risk or seemingly at risk for any special needs. And they don't qualify, the family does not qualify, or the child does not qualify. And then, but once you receive that, then you also can have up to a $2,000 income deduction on your South Carolina tax form. And I realize that a lot of you are not South Carolina residents, but a number of states have different kinds of programs where they offer different kinds of subsidies. Dwayne, you want to talk about North Carolina, what North Carolina offers?
Well, I'm not sure about the specifics that you're referring to here. I do know that North Carolina offers a state tax credit that is half of whatever the federal is, just towards any
very
adoption.
Generous.
Yeah.
And that's on international and domestic, Dwayne?
Yes, and that's my understanding is that it is. So that was something that just came on about 2 years ago. I've heard of these types of subsidies that you talked about that South Carolina has, and I know people that have been able to get that in North Carolina, but I think recently maybe it's become more difficult in North Carolina.
Right, and excuse me, almost all other states, though, when you are adopting through social services, you can get non-recurring subsidies of up to $2,000. And again, it's very generous. I would assume that would be taken off your tax credit refund, but nonetheless, it's nice to know that you don't have to wait till you file your taxes even to get some money back for families. And again, maybe the specifics of that would have to be worked out with a CPA or a tax attorney. All right, then the employee benefits. John, do you want to talk about this too then?
Yeah, I didn't mean to jump the gun on that.
No, that's okay.
You can.
I don't think we could say some of this too much because it's a lot to take in. So repeating some things is good.
So if you're lucky enough to work for an employer that provides you with the benefit of reimbursing you for adoption expenses, that does not necessarily mean you cannot get the tax credit. You cannot get the tax credit for the expenses that were reimbursed, but you can get the credit for other expenses that are above and beyond what you were reimbursed for.
Right, because a lot of adoptions, particularly if you're adopting, say, internationally, it's very easy for your adoption to come to, with all the expenses and travel and everything, to easily come to over $26,000, $27,000. So let's just say a family adopted from a country and they spend, like say China, for example, say you would spend somewhere around $25,000. So then can the family then receive the tax credit refund and then also get the benefit from their employer as well?
Yes, it's my understanding that they would. They would get the reimbursement for whatever amount their employer reimburses them for, and then they'd get up to the $13,170 for the rest of their expenses. So if you can get your employer to reimburse you and then take the credit, that's a wonderful thing. And I mean, a lot of people maybe where before they might not have had $13,000 in the tax liability and didn't care to spread it out over time. Like I said earlier, now that tax credit is refundable, so it would eliminate your tax liability and then issue you a check for the refund. So you could get that money back whenever you get. If you get a refund normally, then you get an even bigger one instead of having to draw it out over 5 years. So that's a big change.
While you're here too, John, let me ask you, would you recommend a family who's in the middle of an adoption perhaps to pay less in taxes over the year? Like you're adopting right now, you know that your expenses are up and you would like to not pay so much to Uncle Sam in federal taxes, knowing that you're going to get it back. Now, I realize that the adoption doesn't go through as quickly as you want, and it doesn't happen in the year that you want. Then all of a sudden you could be owing a lot in taxes if you're not setting that money aside. But could a family go ahead and do that knowing that they have the tax credit? So when Uncle Sam says, yes, you owe us $8,000 in taxes, and then you have your credit, then you don't necessarily owe the IRS that much.
You kind of answered your own question, and it's a gamble. And obviously you're going to need to speak with your CPA and talk about that with them. But if you're in the position where I tell people all the time, if you're in the position where you're normally getting a refund every year, then maybe you need to reevaluate your W-4 and your withholdings to begin with, because you're basically giving the government an interest-free loan. So if you're getting a refund every year anyways, yes, take a second look at it and see what you're doing. But I don't know that because things can happen with the adoption, and if the adoption fails, you don't get to take the credit until the following tax year. It might not be the best idea to do that. But if you have expenses that you're trying to pay for and you can't pay them because of your withholdings, then that might be an option to free up some income to pay the actual expenses with. But again, I would highly recommend that you speak with your CPA or tax preparer before you make any changes like that.
Sure. And by the way, for a list of employers, that provide employee benefits, adoption employee benefits, you can go to the David Thomas Foundation website, and there is a listing of those employers. And it's not an exhaustive list, and it's always worth asking your employer if they're willing to do it, because sometimes an employer might be willing to offer it to you by reducing your income and then giving you, instead of your income, giving it to you as a tax-free adoption benefit. You want to address that a little bit? How you could save on Medicare payments and everything else and state taxes if your income is reduced?
Well, right. If it's not taxable income, then they're not withholding anything from it. So if you can go to your employer and essentially bargain with them and say, hey, reduce my salary this year, but pay some of these adoption expenses, then the amount that they give you for the adoption expenses will be better than if you get paid that in salary, have the taxes taken out, and then pay the expenses with that money afterwards. So anytime you can get non-taxable income, it's a good thing. So that would be one thing to consider.
Now with the refund, if your income goes lower and you don't have as much in federal taxes to pay, well, you could still see it as a refund instead of just as a credit. Because a lot of our families, particularly those in the ministry who don't make a lot of money to begin with, would never even see the tax credit because they weren't paying enough in federal taxes, even when it's spread over 5 years, to recoup, say, the $10,000 to $12,000, whatever it was each year in the tax credit. And now they have, with the refund, it makes the employer benefit even more attractive because they can get it from each end, even if and again, I don't know if those who are, say, in the ministry and in churches and small organizations that have some flexibility in doing this. And then, of course, a lot of large organizations already have established adoption employer benefits. And if you would like to go ahead and talk to your employer, by the way, I was just going to mention that David Thomas Foundation also has a kit to give to your employer.
That's a good point you made, Laura, about whereas before, if you reduced your income, you might kind of hurt yourself because you might not owe enough in taxes to take advantage of the credit. But now, whereas the credit's refundable, it doesn't matter that you lower your income and you don't have a very high tax liability because you get the refund. because it's a refundable credit this year and next year.
And by the way, let me just add a little bit of a caveat there too. Yesterday I was meeting with someone from our U.S. Senator's office, and she handles adoption out of the D.C. office. And there are some bills, bipartisan bills going through, and it does look like this is going to be extended. Again, I don't have the ability to look into the future, needless to say, but as far as we can see, there's a lot of bipartisan support from both the Republicans and the Democrats, and it looks like this is very positive as far as the year 2012. I do want to add also certain other segments of the population have reimbursement, such as the military. There's basically, it's almost like an employer benefit in the sense that if you're in the military, you can get up to $2,000 for an adoption. And then also, although this isn't money that's given to you, it is nice to know that now there is the Federal Family Medical Leave Act. Again, whenever you're adopting and there's stress involved and you have to rearrange your schedule, oftentimes it does impact you financially. And just to let you know that that this is available for families, and you are allowed to take up to 12 weeks off, although it is without pay. All right. The other way of also adding some financial incentive to your adoption is to actually apply for grant programs. And there are a number of organizations such as Show Hope that actually provide funds to families. They usually pay your agency directly. Oftentimes you do have to be working with an agency. You can't be working with just an attorney in order to receive these type of grant programs. And they also require that you have a home study already completed, so that is something that you would have to pay for before you would even see any funding. A specific country program, you'll probably need a letter from your placing agency. And as I mentioned before, you'll need to use a licensed adoption agency. And oftentimes it's based on your income, your attributes, and even your fundraising abilities. A lot of times these grant programs want to see what are you doing to actually raise your own funds. All right, Dwayne, this is our adoption loans with the Abba Fund.
Okay. Well, thanks, Laura and John, for being proactive to get this information out. This is very important. I'm glad you're recording this so we can share it with others. I'm with Abba Fund. We provide interest-free loans to families. Last year, we were able to help a majority of our families through church partnerships. We will partner with the church. They will send us maybe $10,000 or $20,000, and we designate those funds specifically for families from that church. And so just wanted to mention that in case any of you have a church that's talked about setting up an adoption assistance program, but they did not know how, the most effective way to do that, either through the church or establish their own 501c3 or through a partnership. We're able to do that, and we're also able to, within a partnership, facilitate a grant program. So in our general fund, it's just strictly interest-free loans. Within a church partnership, we can do loans or grants. And then the third thing that we do, just a little bit off the topic, but we have a national conference each year in October 1st and 2nd of this year. It's going to be in Austin, Texas. It's called Together for Adoption. So you can look out at togetherforadoption.org or go to Abba Fund's website. The interesting thing about the interest-free adoption loan is that when families borrow the money, they many times set up a minimum loan repayment of $100 or $200 per month, but the large amounts come back into us usually the first part of the year. We've seen several loans paid off over the last month or two, and people will receive their refund, not necessarily a refund, but the money that they paid in, that they've overpaid, plus all the rest of their federal taxes. Yeah, the federal taxes. They get their tax refund back, and they send us $3,000 or $4,000 to pay a big chunk of the loan off or to finish paying off their loan. So That's the way Abba Fund works. It really maximizes the tax credit. We try to be the last money in, which means a lot of times we're just dispersing the funds for the family to be able to travel. So I see here a loan should be taken only when you have the resources to pay it back. So we always try to make sure that the adoption is going to be finalized, but we also look at the families. We're very strict about helping only Christian families, so we look at their church attendance, we look at their involvement, we look at their finances. We require the home study before we can even review the application. So we really do an extensive check there. Okay. Income, let's see, expenses go with the child, income could decrease. When you pay back your loan, you pay for another family's adoption. Laura, you did a good job on this. That's the other amazing thing about the loan program is that the funds come in, they go out to a specific family, and that family, as they pay the loans back, they know that the funds that they're paying back in go to help other families over and over. So it's just a great model.
Great. Well, thank you.
Is that's all you got there? Paperwork?
Yeah,
for
and I
grant
just
or
wanted
loan?
to say, what kind of paperwork that a family would go ahead and do? How daunting is it for the family to go ahead and do this?
Well, I mean, we
for
do
a grant
get
or a loan.
Yeah, it's pretty thorough. So we get a lot of questions from people in advance. If we fill this application out, will you be able to give us money? Because we do require the home study. We ask a lot of questions just about the family's spiritual background and some of those things where our board really wants to be sure that the child's going into a Christian family. So, and then we also ask for like a balance sheet, a lot of the financial information. A lot of it can be pulled out of the home study that you've already done. And we require 3 reference letters, a pastor reference, a friend or family, and an employer. So, yeah, that's the primary thing. So it is kind of a long application, but we really encourage people to take their time and fill it out and answer the questions to the best of their abilities. One thing that we've done is we've partnered with a ministry. When I say partner, we refer families with their permission to Pathways for Little Feet, another interest-free loan program in Houston, Texas. So you can look up Pathways. Also, Lifesong for Orphans in the Chicago area. Andy Lehman, they have a good ministry, very similar to Abba Fund. And then also Show Hope was mentioned. So many, I know Pathways will accept our application, so you don't have to do another application over. You'll notice that Lifesong and Show Hope, their applications are similar, but you would be able to duplicate a lot of the same information that you share with them when you apply with Abba Fund.
And all this is on your website too, right, Dwain?
Yes, it's laid out with our, there's an application that you can pull down in a PDF or a Word document. Just go to abbafund.org and click on How Can We Help You, and you'll see the application and the instructions.
Great. Thank you. And I do want to talk just a little bit more. I know you were talking about it, but just a little more detail about your church's involvement in the loan program, because I think that is so exciting that, especially as so many churches now are focusing in on orphan ministries, that you're partnering now with churches, which is a great way in how it takes the administrative piece out and the deciding which family is going to get a loan and which one isn't, and the fairness, and even working with agencies in the same way. And I know you mentioned it, can you kind of talk a little bit further about that?
Yeah, I mean, the really big advantage for the church is that they have a third party reviewing the applications, they have a third party making the decision, and it also makes it so they don't have to cover the administration of it. And we do this at no charge to the church. We try to encourage the church to support Abba Fund through mission support or other ways, but it's not required, and we do this as a service to the church. And then we also have established several partnerships with adoption agencies. So that is a great resource for your agency if you want to steer them to us. If they just contact us through our website, through our contact form, we will send them all of the information on the process to establish a partnership, and we have an operating agreement that we can tailor. We customize it to the agency or to the church based on the amount of involvement that they want to have. So that's a great point, Laura. And also the matching grant aspect, we are able to do grants within the partnerships.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing too is if your church, say, takes up a special offering, and John, maybe you want to address this a little further. You know, you're say you're Joe and Judy Smith, and you're looking to adopt, and your church takes up a special offering. Well, that may not be tax deductible under the IRS rules, but if it's done, again, through a third party, whereas there's just a few families, and there's a general offering taken up for the Abba Fund, and then the loan is given to you. Of course, it's a loan, not really, but if or a grant that were to be given, could it then, John, then it would be more likely to be tax deductible for the folks who are obviously making a donation, because it's not actually going to a specific person at that point.
Right. That's kind of a complicated area. But if you're giving to your church, and then the church decides to create a fund with Abba Fund, it'd be more likely that donation to the church would be tax deductible, yes. Mm-hmm. Whereas you can't give, where if John Smith and Susie Smith say, we're trying to adopt a kid, you can't go to John and Susie and say, well, here's $500. I hope that helps. That's not tax deductible. So if you were to give to your church, and then they created a fund with Abba Fund, then yeah, that individual giving to the church is most likely going to be tax deductible.
Tax deductible for who's giving, right? Yeah.
And that's a good point. That's why we have the third-party partnership in the middle, is that the church can take up an offering and the donations are tax deductible and they come to Abba Fund, or the people in the church can send the money to Abba Fund and specify and request and preference that money goes to their church partnership. And, you know, we, under IRS rules and everything, we have the final say and the decision-making in that. But most of the time, I mean, we always honor that, but we have to have the right language, and we have to do this right to where we're not putting it towards a specific family. But when a church sets up a fund, then families can go through the approval process, and if they are approved based on the criteria that Abba Fund and the church has worked out, then they are able to receive the assistance. But it just really takes out that temptation for a family or a person to try to donate money for a specific family. We have it set up so it goes to a specific fund that then people can apply to. So, you know, John, you don't have to go into that, but if there's something wrong that I'm saying there, please correct me.
No, I was just going to say that's exactly correct. It's a highly, highly technical aspect, whereas a church gives money to Abba Fund. Abba Fund ultimately makes that final decision, because right. If they don't, then that won't count. So Abba Fund has the final ultimate decision, but it can be requested that it goes somewhere to help somebody. But if that person doesn't need the money, then Abba Fund is free to spend it wherever they want. And if Abba Fund decides that person is not the best candidate, then Abba Fund is the ultimate controller of where it goes, and that's what allows it to be tax deductible.
Well, the thing I really love about the Abba Fund is that if someone were to donate, or a church were to donate $10,000, well, and they were just to give that to one family, that would be one family who can have part of their adoption paid if it were just a regular grant. But through that $10,000, over time, multiple families can adopt. And that is the blessing. It's not just a blessing to receive it, but it's the blessing to even be paying that $100 every month. You pay back your loan and pay back through your tax credit and whatnot, that you get to see another family adopt because of that. And I'm just thrilled that the program works like that, and that multiple people, through one donation, multiple families can go ahead and adopt, and multiple children can be placed into homes as a result. All right, talking about raising money, and certainly, Dwain, I know that this is near and dear to your heart too, so feel free to jump in. We certainly aren't experts on raising money for adoption, but we have seen families do it. We've seen families be very successful in doing it. And of course, as we become more savvy with the internet, especially the younger adoptive families, raising money through Facebook, Twitter, blogs, all sorts of ways that families can go ahead and solicit, and that seems to be very successful. And of course, there's the old-fashioned sending out letters to families and friends, and old aunts and grandmas and people like that you probably want to send a regular stamped envelope to. Certainly through special events, which we will talk about, and pray for your church to have a vision for your child. And again, whether it's through a loan program or actually raising direct money for your child. Certainly the social networking and orphan care ministries. The orphan care ministries are really growing. I believe Dan Krover with Together for Adoption, which is affiliated with the Abba Fund, said there's over 1,000 churches now in the United States recently that are involved in orphan care ministries. And just a few years ago, there were only 100, and then a couple of years later it was 200, and now it's 1,000. But again, as I mentioned, the Facebook and Twitter and blogging, sometimes you can actually go onto certain websites and have purchases made for your adoption. Show Hope is setting this up, where they have various products such as T-shirts and scarves and so forth, and you can go ahead and do that. Or you could set up your own site for selling products. And again, as I mentioned, you want to maybe do letter writing. And we actually do have a sample letter. If anyone would like to receive that, you can write to me at the end. You'll have my email, and I can send you that sample of a type of a letter that you can go ahead and send to families and friends, or by email, soliciting funds. And it sounds so awful to say solicit funds, but it really is just like a letter that you may receive from someone who's going on a mission trip. And you probably have received them, and you probably all have given. And now this is your opportunity, too, for people to share with you. And that's the great thing, is that it's not just about asking for money, but it's really about people really being a part of your adoption, so that they could be praying for your child, they could be praying for you, and then they can follow you as you go through your adoption. And if at all possible, do send a picture of your child or a picture of the child's country here. The other way to raise money is through benefit dinners with a silent auction. And it's estimated you could raise about $3,000 doing that. Sometimes your church or other site might be the place to have it. A breakfast is often cheaper, and if you can get folks to help out and do that, that's great. And you can usually have the cost of the dinner paid for by the admission. So if you're having a chili dinner and you charge $5 a person, usually that could be covered. And then what you do is you take up an offering afterwards. Now, again, if it's specifically for you, it's not going to be tax deductible for folks when they're making out a check to you, Joe and Judy Smith, but a lot of people are still going ahead and willing to do that. The other way to do it is selling large items at a yard sale, maybe getting, again, at your church, getting people to donate products. So you're not just selling your old clothes or whatever and old books, but you have something more significant to go ahead and sell. And again, this is really exciting because you can pull other people in. So it's not just about a yard sale that you're inviting people to, but you're actually having people saying, yeah, I've been having this old piece of furniture, and I really want to get rid of it, but, I haven't really quite taken it to the consignment shop to get money. And this way people can feel really good about, well, that old dresser that I had, or that really nice table that I just don't know where to put, it's actually helping the Smiths adopt a baby or a child or, an orphan from another country, that it gives that people the sense that they're contributing to something much larger than themselves. And as I mentioned before about going, I mentioned about Craigslist and so forth, that's the other way that you can do that. What can you expect to earn at a yard sale? You can expect to earn about $500 to $1,000. If you have a very large one, you can earn up to $3,000 to $5,000. I have a friend recently who had an estate sale at her home, and she was selling some very nice pieces, but nothing very expensive. One in and of itself, it wasn't like there was a $5,000 piece of furniture, but she did raise $7,000 in selling furniture, some, when I say artwork, I don't mean original artwork, but prints and so forth, just through that and through knickknacks and collection pieces and so forth, she was able to raise $7,000. It's always good if you can get a friend who's an expert. There are people like who really love garage sales and really know how to organize them, and that would be great to have someone do that. What sells best are things like baby clothes and equipment, household items, all the decorative kind of things, DVDs and videos, and, of course, furniture. I would recommend staying away from clothes unless they're baby clothes, because that just gets to be very burdensome, and you might be taking it off to Goodwill at the very end. And, again, getting your church involved in your adoption. Again, you'll have people praying for you. You'll have people supporting you. When your child comes home, you want to feel that your church is an integral part of your child's adoption. In our church, we really do believe in covenant children, and really I feel very strongly about that the church is there for you. And when you think about particularly adopting a child from another country who may have been what some people call in the hard places, a child may have experienced neglect, perhaps even abuse, and you're going through some difficult times. You want to have people there who are behind you, who understand what you're going through, and that they feel, again, that that's not just your responsibility to take care of your child. It may be some babysitting services. It may be coming and doing your laundry or cooking some meals even after your child is home, that as people participate in your adoption, they're going to feel more a part of it. So you might want to have your church sponsor a dinner, a barbecue, a breakfast of pancakes, perhaps a progressive dinner at various friends' or families' homes. And one thing I do want to encourage you to do, and I mentioned it before, but to show a picture of your child or children from the country, and whatever you do, whether you're having a yard sale or whatever, whether you're sending out letters on your blog, when people can see your child, it is so wonderful. Now, a lot of times, of course, when you're first starting, you may not have a referral of a child, or you may be, like, say, for example, a country like Ukraine, where you may be going, identifying a child. Once you're in the country, then show pictures of children from your child's country. And that really helps people to feel, again, an ownership of it. And we all know that when we have something that we can truly identify with, that there is a personhood behind whatever someone is doing, this really does help families and others to feel, again, a part of what you're doing. And then going ahead and finding money for your adoption, reducing your expenses, eating in and create a child fund, working overtime, sell items. And this is something that I really feel, again, strongly about, because sometimes I know as a parent it's okay for me to make sacrifices, but I don't necessarily want my children to make sacrifices. But if you have children, getting them involved, and yes, we're going to do this, we're not going to eat out, or we're going to put these, instead of buying those new pair of sneakers, we're going to go to get a secondhand pair or whatever, and we're going to take that difference and we're going to put it into the child fund. That can really help your child see how sacrificing for an orphan can make a difference in the world. And as I mentioned, putting that money aside for the adoption, having your children have that vision, and then even on a blog that you can go ahead and tell how much you've saved. And that would be really good for people to contribute other ideas on how you're going ahead and saving money, because as you're raising money, you want to also show what you're doing on your part. If you're asking for money, how the sacrifices that you may be making. And I mentioned before about eBay or Craigslist, going ahead and selling items. Books sell very well, particularly theological books sell well on eBay, and cookbooks and self-help type books. And again, a child is so valuable, and think about the things that you may have of value within your home, such as old coin collections, stamp collections. I happen to be a collector of Longaberger baskets that I have, dolls, antiques, whatever. None of these can compare with what a child is valued in your life, that if you can go ahead and sell these to help pay for an adoption. So what can you expect to kind of help pay for your adoption? Well, with the tax credit, the $13,170. If you perhaps were going to get a loan or an employee benefit, perhaps up to $5,000, and we're estimating a little bit on the lower side, $1,500 donation, and say you were to have a $3,000 fundraiser. Well, the total would be $22,670. And I can tell you, for example, at Nightlight, that's well above the cost of a domestic adoption. This would include your home study. This would include any travel, perhaps even the finalization of your adoption. And again, I can't always guarantee that every adoption would come to this amount or less, but certainly that is a reasonable amount of what an adoption may cost. And even for a China adoption, it may come to a little bit more than this, but you can realistically see how you can actually raise the money or obtain the funds one way or the other to go ahead and pay for almost your entire adoption. And if you would like to know any more information, if you'd like to get that letter, and certainly visit our websites, I just want to go ahead and put this up on the screen. I'm Laura Beauvais-Godwin, as I mentioned before, and John Hine in his email address, and Dwain at the Abba Fund. And I am going to stop our recording, and then I will go ahead and look, and then I will go ahead and answer some of your questions. Thank you very much for participating.